Figuring out what rack to use and where to place it in the Omni and Omni Plus can be so confusing. In this video, I'm going to give you 10 tips to not only help you decide where you're supposed to place the rack, when you're supposed to use this drip pan, but also how to get the best cooking out of your Omni, Omni Plus, and your other air fryer ovens. The Omni air fryer oven comes with 3 different racks to cook with. It comes with what I call the baking or wire rack. In the manual, they call this the baking tray, but I call this the drip tray, and I'll tell you why a little later in the video and why I don't really use this much for baking. And it also comes with the air fryer basket. Now, what confuses most people is when you're supposed to use these, how to interchange them, and where you're supposed to place them. And in this video, I'm going to go over each of those in detail. The Omni and Omni Plus make it really convenient when you're starting out on where to know when to place this wire baking rack, because it has it written right on the door when you should use the top, the middle, and the bottom levels. And when you're starting out, I would go ahead and use those as a general guide. But there are a few times I think those don't work, or where there are better ways to position your racks, and we're going to go into that next. The way I decide where to place my rack and which combination of racks to use in the air fryer mode is I like to think of my air fryer oven not as an oven, but as a fryer. And what I mean by that is think of frying food in hot oil or deep frying food. The reason that it works so great is that your food, the surface area of the food, is completely surrounded evenly with that hot oil. And that's what makes it cook well and evenly and get that crispy, crunchy thing that we love about fried food. Well, you want to think about cooking in your Omni oven the same exact way. You want your food to have as much surface area surrounded by that hot air as possible. So you want the least amount touching racks or anything like that. Plus you want it surrounded in the middle by that air as much as you can. I'm going to start off describing the different levels. So first you have the top level, then you have the middle, and then the bottom. Now, this one down here is for the drip tray, and I very rarely, if ever, cook on that one. I found that this setup right here is the optimal position for air frying, with just the wire rack in the middle position. You can see how any food that you'd place on the rack in this position, the most of that surface area will come in contact with the hot air. For food that's too small to fit directly on the rack, the next best thing is to use the basket. And a few tips using the basket are to spray it with PAM or olive oil spray, and to use a scrub brush for easy cleanup. To air fry food that has sauce or a lot of moisture and fat or otherwise would make a complete mess, that's when I turn to my sheet pan with the silicone line. You can see, however, how the hot air wouldn't reach the bottom of the food when using this position. So this is when you'd have to turn your food or flip it, and the Omni will tell you to do so 3/4 of the way through cooking. You might be wondering why I just don't place the food on the black drip tray. And the reason that is because the dark color absorbs heat and tends to overcook the food on the bottom. It also causes a lot of smoking, and I find that cooking food on that black drip tray really discolors it. And cooking on a sheet pan, it's much easier to clean. And if it gets discolored or ruined, you can just get another one, where with the black drip tray, at this time, you can't order anymore. You're probably wondering, when do I use this drip pan in the air fry mode? If I'm cooking something that doesn't drip a lot in the air fryer, my fried chicken or something like that, what I'll do is sometimes I'll place this, if I don't want it to get the bottom of the air fryer dirty, I will think of this as a floor, like raising the floor of the air fryer oven, and I'll put it on the very, very bottom position. And that will keep the airflow. You still have a lot of airflow on the bottom and the top, but it'll keep the drippings from hitting the bottom of the oven and making it easier to clean. When baking things, I will put the wire rack on the lower position, and this works well because on bake mode in both the Omni and Omni Plus, the top and bottom heating elements are used. And whenever you're cooking anything like a cake, casseroles, things like that, usually baking things, they tend to get browner on the top before they're done in the middle and on the bottom. So by moving this rack down to the lower position, that helps to keep whatever you're baking farther away from the top heating element and the fan. And that can help a lot by reducing the amount of over browning you get while your things are baking.
Bake mode on the air fryer oven is my go-to for things like cakes and cookies, especially ones that have a lot of rise to them, because the airflow gives the baked goods a really nice crumb on the inside. Even with the rack in this position, you can get over browning on the top before it's cooked in the middle, and that usually happens with foods that have a really thick batter. 2 tricks you can do to help mitigate over browning is when you're baking, make sure that the convection is set to low. Trick number 2 is if you see that your food is over browning but it still needs more time to cook through, you can take the black drip pan, set it in the top position, and that'll keep the airflow from over browning the top, but it'll allow the rest to cook. This is also the best setup for frozen pizza. Once the cheese starts to brown, you can place the rack on top, and it will allow the bottom to get crispy and continue to cook without burning the top.
One time where I do like cooking using the black drip tray is when I want to cook something quickly and I want it to have a nice crispy bottom. For example, my Cuban sandwiches. What I'll do is I'll take the black drip tray, I'll put it in the middle position, and then I'll preheat the oven so that this drip tray gets really hot. And then I'll place the sandwich or whatever it is that I want to get crispy, I'll place it right on top of there, and that'll crisp up the bottom while it's crisping up the top, and it works really great. When cooking food that has a lot of moisture or fat to it, or drips a lot or makes a lot of mess, kind of like steaks or roasts, things that you're going to cook in the air fryer like that, then of course, if you put it straight on wire rack, it's going to make a complete mess. You can use the drip tray, but what I would do is, because this gets really hot and any fat, like I said, that drips on that will start to smoke, you can put foil on this. Now you got to make sure, a tip is, whenever using foil, so you have to make sure that you really bend the foil and crimp it around so that it doesn't move.
Another great idea, and I use this when I'm cooking rotisserie a lot or with the kebab cage to keep the bottom clean, is to put foil along the bottom. And I'll use 1 sheet of foil and make sure to crimp it around the heating elements and push it down in the middle to create kind of like a well, and that will collect all of the drippings or the juices. Never do this when using a mode that uses the bottom heating element. In the description below, I'll place a link to my beginner's guide that explains in detail which modes use what functions.
Another question I get a lot is how people can air fry using multiple racks or multiple layers. And one of the best tips that I can give you is, because you cannot buy more racks or more drip trays for the Omni, but what you can do is you can use your air fryer basket that comes with the Omni and place it on top of another air fryer basket that you can get. This is perfect because you can place this basket right on top and it sits perfectly with enough airflow, and that way you can air fry 2 layers of food at the same time. You can place these 2 baskets directly on the drip tray to give it a little more stability than on the rack, and you want to make sure that you put it in the lower position, and again, never use a mode that uses the bottom heating element when using that drip tray. When cooking on the top level, you have to really be careful because it is so close to the fan and the top heating element that things will dry out and burn very quickly. And honestly, I've had this Omni oven since it came out a year ago, and I have never cooked on the top level because I find that it overheats food and it just burns it, dries it out. So I really don't recommend doing it. If you are going to use broil because you want to heat something up quickly, you really have to make sure that you watch it very carefully and not let it overheat. Another thing I don't like about the top level and why I don't recommend using it is because the splatter is so close to the fan and the top heating element, which is almost impossible to clean. So the farther away you can cook from that top heating element, the better. And my final tip is to get creative. Try to use these things in unconventional ways. For example, when I'm making tortillas, you can drape them over each of the wire racks hanging down, and they turn into like great tacos. It's awesome. Also, if you're dehydrating things like herbs that don't have a lot of weight to them and you don't want them flying around in your oven, you can take the basket, turn it upside down on the drip tray, and that'll help to dehydrate and keep everything in place. I hope you enjoyed this video and found it helpful. And if you have any questions or you're having issues with cooking in your Omni, Omni Plus, or your air fryer, you absolutely can ask me in the comments below. Also, let me know if there's any ways that you've used the rack that you found really helpful. Happy cooking, stay safe, thanks for watching, bye!